Welcome back to a special Coffee and Curveballs edition, Recruiting Essentials. We have big news in the NCAA recruiting landscape. There's been some changes made here, so we had to bring in the big dogs. We got close to 50 years recruiting experience from mid-major, power major, SEC, Power 5. These guys got all the knowledge. But Brandon Hall in North Carolina, Sammy Esposito, South Carolina. Welcome to the show, boys.
Good to be here.
50 years, you make us sound old. I appreciate that.
Yeah, he's not telling which one's got more experience or which one of us recruited the other. So,
well, gents, we had some really big news drop from the NCAA this week about recruiting and when, more specifically, coaches can get into contact with players. As many of us know, there had been some gray lines where guys were going behind the scenes, working in and out with a middleman. That has all stopped. So I guess right to dive into it, Brandon, I want to head to you. What was the old rule and where are we now with this new legislation?
Yeah, so the NCAA has dates set up where college coaches are allowed to contact players based on their grades and what year they are in school. So there was a date where you could start calling and texting and bringing players in on visits when they hit a junior year. There was a date you could start doing official visits with juniors and seniors. There was a date even being able to just contact players as prospective student athletes, which is a term that becomes fairly important with all those dates being thrown out because prospective student athlete is a ninth grader. And so it allowed coaches some freedom with sixth, seventh, eighth graders at times because they weren't prospective student athletes yet. The new rule basically is very cut and dry. No contact, no phone calls, no visits, no talking to anybody that is not getting ready to go into their junior year. And then that date's going to be August 1. So August 1, after the sophomore year, coaches will then be allowed to text, email, and call those players. And then as I think they get into September, they're actually allowed to start setting up visits, whether it's official or unofficial with those players. And that rule changed a little bit too as well, which I think is, again, a good thing for the student athlete. And so this is a rule that's been coming down the pipe. It's actually been implemented in volleyball and softball to rave reviews. And so we'll kind of see how baseball adapts to it.
It's interesting that baseball was the last ones to kind of come around to this. And it took all of, the chaos really for those freshmen. I'm sure there's a lot of parents who say, oh, we know a freshman who's committed right now, a sophomore who's committed right now. So I guess there's some good things. Sammy, how do you think this will change the way things happen in the recruiting world?
Well, I think it'll slow it down a lot for everybody. I think it's, I was actually had a conversation with a parent about this other day where I said your son can now just enjoy playing the game of baseball and not have to focus so much of where you're getting recruited, who's recruiting you, who's talking to who. I just really think it slows down, right? You see a lot of kids that are freshmen that are really good players that maybe are getting recruited that are trying to focus on possibly the wrong things as a freshman or sophomore in high school. And also on top of that, I think it slows it down a ton for college coaches. College coaches now only going to have to focus on 2 recruiting classes versus where some of these schools are focusing on 4 or 5, heck, maybe even 6 different classes. There was one time I saw something where college coaches are worried about recruiting or coaching 14-year-olds to 24-year-olds, which when you look at it that way, it's very difficult for the job those guys have to do. But I think just in the general scheme of things, I think it's going to slow it down, but it also compress it into a shorter period. So once that date does come, it's really going to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour really fast for a lot of these players that are out there that are really good players that are going to be recruited at colleges.
So you talk about slowing things down. Brandon, I'm going to go to you for this one. Things are slowing down. And for the parents out there, or does this mean coaches will just not have any looks at all at a freshman and sophomore, and then August 1 hits of that sophomore summer going into junior year? Oh, who's this guy?
No, not necessarily. I think you're going to see the levels of how teams are able to get commitments and how quickly they're able to get commitments start to pair off how far in advance they start watching players. So a really good mid-major school probably still doesn't start really hammering their recruiting and throwing an overdrive right now today and in years past until the summer prior to the senior year. And that's when they get about 75-80% of their commitments done. For some of your Power 5 schools, They're probably about 60-70% done by the time that those players finish their junior year in high school. So knowing that and knowing that August 1 date's coming, they're going to have an idea. These are our targets, and these who I want to see, and they're going to start building their list behind it. The difference for me is this. In years past, Sammy Esposito goes on the road. He sees somebody in the state of Texas, and he likes him. Okay, we put him on our list. I'm going to go see him again. Boom, he sees him again. At this point, Sammy has to make a decision because now word's out that Sammy's been out there twice. Other schools are starting to notice. Somebody else is going to come in. Somebody's going to get on the phone with him. Somebody's going to set up a visit. Somebody's going to tell him just to slow down and wait. So Sammy's got to get the offer out. What's going to happen now is schools will have a chance to send their recruiting coordinator out and really build the evaluation. And so instead of the recruiting board looking like, here's the guys we have committed and here's the guys we're getting ready to offer, the recruiting board is going to be a lot like a draft board. Here's all the players we think can play with us, put them in the order. And then when we hit August 1, we're going to start going through that order of players and figuring out very quickly who's in or who's out as much as my program allows me to. Again, not every program is going to be able to say on August 1, I need to know. But there are programs that will do that and can do that. What most programs are going to do is on August 1 go, hey, we have interest. What else is going on with you? Who else have you heard from? And when they start hearing that the player doesn't have any other phone calls, maybe they can move faster. When they start hearing the player has 60 other phone calls lined up that day, then they got to figure out how they're going to differentiate themselves.
It still sounds like having that playing experience, getting out there, developing freshman, sophomore year. And I'm sure a lot of parents are not concerned so much, but like know about the transfer portal. Hey, the portal, what can we go in here? NIL, all this stuff going around. Do you think, Sammy, that this will help curtail a little bit of that transfer portal? So many guys going in because they were committing as freshmen or too soon.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it'll affect it a little bit. The portal doesn't look like it's going that way anytime soon, or slowing down. But I think it will slow down over the course. And like you said, you see some kids that maybe have committed to schools at a young age, and I'm not going to say it's a miss or whatever it is, but they wind up on campus and then they wind up going to the portal. I think these schools are like Brandon said, are going to have a better feel for these players coming into their program now, because they're gonna spend more time than a one weekend shot of trying to evaluate that guy. So I think down the road, yes, it will have an effect of the portal slowing down a little bit, just because of kids are going to have a better feel of what's out there. The schools are going to have a better feel for the player that they're getting onto campus. Because some of these schools will see a kid one time and they have to pull the trigger.
You have to.
And that might be the greatest day that kid ever had in his life. And he shows up on the campus and, they're worrying about the next recruit, not as much what they got. And he gets to campus and they want to go, whoa, this isn't a good fit. The kid goes in the portal and it becomes that bad cycle. So yes, I do think that it could play a part of slowing down the portal a little bit.
Now, do you guys think that the teams, and especially I guess I'm talking really at the highest level, are in favor of this? Because, hey, this guy started recruiting juniors, so they all started recruiting juniors. Then they went to sophomores. This guy tried to get ahead on freshmen. This guy in eighth graders. So you kind of had to keep up with the Joneses and do it. Like I have not blamed any of those guys for their early recruiting, because if you're not doing it, the next guy is, and we need legislation to do this. Is that what this is designed to help stop?
I think so. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that, though. It's you have very competitive people that are out recruiting and trying to figure out how to land players. You also had an environment where most of us are fairly good friends on the road. Even though we're banging heads, and even though I want to beat Sammy on the field, we would hang out at the field and talk for 3 hours while we're watching the game. And I know his family, and I know the guy, what's going on with behind the scenes at their program and things like that. And so we're not going to steal prospects. And I think that's the difference between where baseball is and where this has been settled a little bit for a sport like football. Football doesn't care. Once you commit, then the bigger schools go, okay, at least we have a feel for what you're thinking. Now we'll start recruiting you. Baseball's never been that way. And so I think that competitiveness, along with, kind of the camaraderie within the game, this new rule is going to allow the game to get back to what it's supposed to be. Recruiting is supposed to be about sales. selling the program, selling the staff, selling the school. Recruiting is not supposed to be about the first and the most. Here I'm the first one to make an offer. I'm making the biggest offer. The biggest offer makes a difference. I get that. But as players get into their junior and senior year, I think parents are a little bit more wise to what school's actually going to cost, how scholarships actually work, because now we have more friends that are in this process. We've seen more people go through it. A freshman in high school hasn't been around a teammate go off to college and come back yet. When you're a junior, now you've been around people. What was the fall like? What was the spring like? How are games handled? What do you mean everybody doesn't travel? I'm on the team and I'm not traveling to a weekend series? How does that work? These little things most players are really shocked by when they get there as freshmen, or they don't learn about until they're juniors or seniors in high school.
That's spectacular. Sammy, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think Brandon hit on the head with the sell part, right? You're bringing a kid into campus. You can really truly tell a recruiter who can really recruit and sell the program. Versus the guy who says, "I saw you on Twitter, and here's 85%." And you got to commit because you're not there. It's more of a collection than getting the guy in, selling them on the campus, selling them on the school, selling them on the staff, and on turn of that, being able to learn more about the kid, learn more about the family. Now it kind of goes back to that portal question you asked. Now you start to understand each other a little bit more. You really know if the kid's a good kid, a bad kid, a questionable kid, where the family is. And then on turn, the family's learning about you too, other than some random phone calls. You get to spend maybe some time with the family and in the schools and really see what's going on. I think that's important. I mean, if any of us out there that have kids, when you send your kids somewhere, you want to make sure you really understand what's going on, not just because they have a great football program and my kid's going to have fun on a Saturday there.
It seems like a quantity versus quality, and what it was quantity has a quality all to itself. And bring in a lot of names. Let's get this early. Let's get what we can, and then we can scout them. Basically, you're collecting and then scouting. Now, hey, you're gonna have to scout, build the relationship. It might take a little bit longer.
Back. I'm going to date myself a little bit because I think I'm older than both of you guys. But South Carolina had a deal when Coach Tanner first got there. He's now the athletic director of South Carolina. They were making this move, and their first shortstop was Brian Roberts, I think, as they kind of got things moving. The next shortstop they brought in, we were still in the process of recruiting guys as they got into their senior year. So as we're going to East Coast Pro, and there's still players at East Coast Pro that aren't committed. I know that's shocking, but there were players that you go to East Coast Pro and they weren't committed yet. They were setting up some visits, and they brought in a shortstop and saying, I cannot remember his name, but he was wedged between Roberts and the transfer from the other the transfer from NC State, and then Brian Roberts, and then it was this player, and I cannot remember his name, but they set him up with a tour of the Chancellor's home.
Oh,
he went, and he went and he toured the Chancellor's home. I thought that's a great way to differentiate yourself, because as a program, my institution is so competitive and wants baseball to be so big that we are going to allow time for a recruit to come spend time with the Chancellor. And so my next day, I went to our athletic director. I said, hey, here's our top 3 guys. I want one of these guys to get in with our Chancellor. No, that didn't happen. But it's a differentiator. And now you start to say, hey, who's really involved in the sport? 3 years later, you're never getting to that because it's sped up so much in that time. The July 1 date starts to go away. We're allowed to text. We're allowed to communicate earlier. We're allowed to get offers out earlier. We were getting, by the time 3 years after that, every player we brought in on an official visit was committed. And Sammy, I don't know you. I mean, you were in it for 10, 12 years. Did you ever have an official visit outside of junior college that was an uncommitted player?
High school wise, no.
Yeah.
No. Every once in a blue moon, you might
every now and then
lump them in with the big group that you had already. But no, usually the official visit was almost more of a celebration for kids hanging in there being committed for a couple, 2-3 years. Hey, let's come in, get everybody together, have a good time, and we'll call it a day.
That wasn't the way it was. And this is going back to guys that recruited with the old July 1 date. And the old July 1 date, I can remember being in Atlanta at a place like Lake Point, and you're having to recruit, you're having to see all these things, you're driving all over the place in Georgia, but it's July 1st. you also have got to figure out, here's my 40 phone calls. Who am I calling when I wake up? Does it matter? I know for a fact Old Dominion called Justin Verlander at 12:01 on July 1st and offered him what they offered him. They didn't wait till 9 o'clock in the morning. They wanted to be first, and bang, they did it. Were there players on our list we need to do that with? What happens if I'm calling teammates? What if I call one teammate before I call the next teammate? All that stuff's going to matter. You're going to have to sift through, because that August 1 date is going to hit, and that rush is going to happen. You're going to have players that are going to get 60, 70, 80 phone calls, and then you're going to have really good players that get one or two. And how do those players react? And so I think from a player standpoint, too, it's important that they kind of understand their value moving towards that August 1 date. How do they really stack up in their class? How do they really stack up in their state? What are their tools? What are their measurables? And how does that compare to guys in the past that have gone to the SEC? If I get to August 1 and I'm a 7-4 runner and I'm playing the middle infield, and I think that South Carolina or Clemson's going to call me if I'm a South Carolina resident, I haven't really done my homework.
Yeah.
And I've wasted a day now. Now it's August 2nd, and I'm nowhere closer to my plan. And so I think families will have an important process to go through as well.
Excellent. I'm going to shift over to what's actually going to be going on with the recruiters in that time, right? We've talked about August 1 is this new date. It's sitting there. You're going into the junior year. You're waiting for August 1st. But those guys are still going to be out on the road, right? And the days are still limited. They didn't change anything to the Father's Day weekend, the 4th of July weekend. Those are still taken away, where it's still a limited amount of days. What will this do? What will those guys be watching? And how will they understand what is coming up the pike?
Well, I think a lot of those guys are, because they're switching the other new rule for them. They're getting another third full-time assistant.
Okay.
That's supposed to go into play. So you're still only going to be allowed to have 3 guys out on the road, right? So obviously some schools are going to divvy it up a little bit more, but you might have some guys that are going to be sitting there watching that upcoming junior class, right? You might send one of your guys out, follow them through the month of June and July, and track guys down that are on your portal. So now you're going to have an extended look, like we talked about earlier, of the true evaluation of the player, right? You're going to have other coaches that are probably going to be, stuck in the portal, seeing what's going on there until they get to that period of time. So, depending on the type of program and where you're at, what your needs are, right? You look at the Power Fives out there that are so far in advance, and their financial, structure is a little bit different than others. They can send out one guy to track down maybe their top 15 to 20 kids that are going to be on their board that they're going to want to have a made offer for right away. And then you can have another coach that's, out chasing the summer league transfer portal kids, kind of going in there. And then you maybe got your head coach, you're sending out the big dog to go at certain point in times. It's getting close, right? It's that back end of July. They're down at the futures games, and the head coach, Jay Johnson, Mark Kingston, Eric Backich, whoever's sitting right by the dugout, letting everybody know, here we are.
Let me just hammer home that rule just for those who are listening about the fact that only 3 coaches can be out on the road at one time. So you can't send out 7 guys from our university or pitching guy or student manager, this guy, 3 guys. So 3 at any time are allowed to be out on the road. And there are certain days and I guess blackout days where you can't be out or you can. Just want to make sure people knew that. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's important, right? Because there's always, they got the dead period, right? That goes that first week of the regionals. And then you got a dead period for Father's Day. Then you got a dead period for July 4th, for the July, the 3 days around that. So there's some periods in there that are dead, that they can't be out. But when it's open, they're going to be gone, right? They're out, they're out the whole time. But, you're going to, then there's some other, smaller schools that are still worrying about the 24 class, coming up, and then they're going to get on it. But kind of going back to August 1st, and I don't want to get caught up so much where, like, everybody's going to get a phone call, right? Like, you might not get a phone call, but as we all know, the recruiting part never stops. So, me, I grew up in North Carolina, and my dream school was NC State. If NC State didn't happen to call me, that's fine. I might blow up a little bit later, and that phone call is still going to come. Just because you don't get a phone call, I don't want people to think that that's the only time you're ever going to get there, because the recruiting is never going to stop. it's never going to stop until you're done playing when it's all said and done, because you might go off to a smaller school and blow up, and now they come try to get you in the transfer portal. But I think how these schools split it up is going to be it'll be interesting to see how they go about their business with it.
And Shooter, we did a study 3 or 4 years ago on recruiting essentials, an article on PBR. And in that study, we went and looked, I think it was about 12 different states. And of those 12 states, every state except Florida had more than half of their senior class commit after November of their senior year. So even though this contact is happening in August, and everybody gets filtered and really caught up with names we know, names we've grown up with. Johnny's been the best player since 11. It's easy to know Johnny's name. There, in North Carolina, where I'm at, we're going to have 400 to 500 college baseball players just about in every class. We're averaging right around that 450 mark.
Okay.
More than half will be seniors after the early signing period before they find their school. Wow. That's probably not going to change. Now you're talking about every level of athlete, and so that it's not going to. This isn't going to affect the D2 calendar in terms of the times they get commitments. It's not going to affect junior colleges in terms of times that they get commitments. We're talking about that August 1 date really only affecting the top 3 to 5% of athletes that were committing prior to that. The lone state that's outside the norm was Florida, and I'm not down there. It's a different beast. But Florida had more players commit, and it wasn't like it was 70, 80%. It was closer to 60 when we did the number. But that's kind of how it's, and I don't see that changing a whole lot in terms of the average baseball player and what his time frame is going to be. I think it's going to be very similar to what it was.
The diving into what freshmen and sophomores should be doing. Let's go over to that side of things, because now you see this date. It's like, okay, I just need to drop my bat and ball and not do anything until August 1st of going into my junior year. And that's not something that I think those guys should be doing. They're still going to play baseball. Development is still very important. College coaches will still be out there. The way I look at it, and you guys have been out recruiting, when you don't know anybody in the game, you walk to the field and you hope somebody does something good. You see something good and then you mark it down. When you know who to watch in that game, you sit there and wait for them to do something good. And that's a very important thing to get on that radar. It's why we're out at games all spring and we have events, because we're building those lists so that these kids can have their names seen, so that coaches will circle, oh, where's he at on PBR? He's here. Let me check his video. Let me see what I like about him. Oh, wow, they have a nice write-up. He runs this time. Now you hit the ground running on August 1st versus, hey, nobody's seen me until this day. In an ideal world, you're so good, they'll find you. In actuality, there's only 3 coaches on the road. It's a condensed recruiting schedule. Your name kind of has to be out there so you have more chances to perform in front of them. Do you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I think it's important, leading into it, right? You're still playing, right? You want to keep playing as much as you can. That's how you're going to get better. You're going to keep practicing. But, I do think that, talking to some schools that, things like us, like Prep Baseball Board, is going to be humongous, because you can have multiple years of data, of videos, of information out on these players, to where when it's getting closer to that date, schools can go look, right? We've been extremely beneficial. And I used to, when I was in the coaching ranks, we would always use PBR. You'd go in there and you look and you see the stuff, but, the names, the this, the that. I think it becomes more important now. They're still going to be out. College coaches are still going to be out there. College coaches are a little crazy. You're still going to go work more than you probably have to, but they're still going to go out to games. But they're going to, when these kids come to our events, or they come to our, we're out, they see our stuff that we're watching in high school games, and they see our information out there, they can use that as a little bit of a mini list to get them rolling into it. And I think what'll be a big separator for the kids is not only that, but they're going to have the data to back it up. Like you said, they can go look and go, oh, Shooter Hunt, when he was a sophomore, was 90-92. Now I saw him in his spring going into his junior summer. He was up to 94. And now it becomes easier for those guys to go in there. They don't have to go blindly look into stuff, and I think that's huge for the players.
I think the other part is just player development and understanding where the player fits. The players, if you really study what our list and what our rankings and what our commitment lists have done, you'll see state by state, almost year in and year out, the states play out the same. The top 30 in this state are typically Division I players. The top 15 in this state are typically, and it's just masses. If you put a mass of people in a place and you have colleges looking for things, that's how it's going to play out. Those numbers stay the same. So it's not about the players necessarily getting in oh my gosh, am I ranked? It's about having an idea of where you're at versus where the guys that ended up with the schools of your goals. And then if you're not getting to that point athletically, being able to alter your goals, because when we get to August 1, it has a chance to move a little bit faster, and understanding the world we live in can help expedite your decision-making process and your process with a school that does call, so that, hey, this isn't really a school I would have thought of 3 months ago, but now I kind of know where I'm at. And this is a school that's really intriguing to me, and now I can show that interest on the initial phone call. I mean, it's great to hear from you, Coach. The other part is, as coaches are going through this, their schedule is going to be lengthened with the junior class or with the sophomore class. Mm-hmm. And so as we're lengthening those classes, that freshman, it's got to come from somewhere. And so those 8th graders and those freshmen that a lot of schools, that some schools were spending time on, that window is being shortened. Now it'll be lengthened on the back end. So where do they make up that time? They make up that time by going to resources they trust, whether that's a high school coach, an alumni, or a database like PBR, where we can feed stats and feed information to those guys.
It really is remarkable with that, but getting on those radars, because I always think back to, okay, August 1 hits and this coach hasn't heard from you. I want to go to South Carolina. I want to go to Chapel Hill, wherever you want to be. Well, if you have a game August 2 and this guy's never heard of you and you hit 3 bombs and he's not there because he didn't know who you were, well, you want to get those eyes as many times, because also you might strike out 3 times in that game. You want him to come back and build that kind of stuff. But recruiting essential wise, the stuff is awesome on the site, prepbaseballreport.com. Look for recruiting essentials from the masters themselves here, who just have all the information. But you can count on us. We're going to continue to dive into this topic, see what the future holds. Don't hesitate to email, tweet, DM, whatever it may be, any questions that you have about the process. That's why we're here. We're trying to help unite the parent and player to those coaches and programs in the future. But Sammy, B. Hall, thank you guys so much for being on this Coffee and Curveball special episode on recruiting essentials. Until next time, I'm Shooter Hunt.